Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
G.I.Joe, the very best, Americas Elite. Eliter than all the rest, trained to have no flaws. Defending liberty across the land, valor oversized. Bring out that big brass band, real heroes verified. Gotta read them all, you must agree. Elitist in history, G.I.Joe. Oh, there could be no end in a world we must defend. G.I.Joe, gotta read them all. A courageous crew. Their colors red, white, and blue. Mess with them and they'll shoot you. G.I. Joe, gotta read them all. Gotta read them all. Yeah.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. Now, if you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website talkingjoe.co.uk. If you've not yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, do that. If you've not yet joined our Facebook group, do that too. Now, today we are continuing our look at the Disavowed era of G.I. Joe with G.I. Joe Americas Elite, issues 1 through 4. This was from Devil's Due, July 2005 through to October 2005. It is the first arc of the Joe Casey run following issue 0 that we covered last time. Now, for those reading along, you can read this in the normal floppies that you can find all over the place. Check out eBay, you'll find good lots there. Or in the trade paperback editions. You can find these issues in the 2006 Devil's Due trade paperback, which is called America's Elite Trade Paperback 1, which is called The Newest War. It covers issues 0 to 5. And there is also a later reprint trade paperback from IDW. I think it was in 2013. That is called America's Elite Volume 1. Now, without further ado, let me introduce my co-host. He's so elite, I'm surprised he's even talking to me. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, listeners, and hello, Mark. And please remember, Elite always has an exclamation mark after it.
It does. except online. It's mostly only in the logo.
All right, so the Devil's Due collection of America's Elite does have the exclamation mark on it, and it reuses a version of the covered issue number 1. The IDW Disavowed collection does not have an exclamation mark on the cover.
The exclamation mark was disavowed as well. How unfortunate.
I guess I'm jumping ahead to let's take a look at the covers.
Yeah, so last time we covered issue 0 in a huge amount of detail. Today we are covering 4 issues. That does mean, Tim, that we have to cover the same amount of content in lesser than or equal time. We are not going to do 2 hours per issue.
I'll be good, and I have fewer notes. And I won't repeat stuff from issue 0. Good things or bad things.
Yeah, and you've listened back because you did the video editing on the last one. So
yes,
that's exciting.
I'm pretty familiar with. So we there was a time where we had YouTube video versions of our Disavowed episodes, and I thought our issue 0 talk was so good, and I had a little spare time. I thought I would do that video, and I haven't done any of our YouTube videos. That's always been Mark or Jay Cordray. Hi, Jay. And I thought I should do one. And boy, was that a lot of work. So kudos to Mark and to Jay for editing all those videos. The versions that are just the audio with a still, or the versions that have a lot of pictures when we're talking about specific things.
And we also had a brand new jingle for the brand new America's Elite read-through. and you got to experience that in all of its glory as well. So the people bringing us these issues that we'll be talking about today were Joe Casey, the writer, pencils by Stefano Caselli, inks by Andrew Pepoy, colours by Sunder Raj with Carsten Bradley and Kendrik Lim of Imaginary Friends Studio for issues 3 and 4, lettering Steve Seeley, and edited by Mark Powers. Associate editor is Mike O'Sullivan.
Can I jump in there with a small additional fact? Caselli does all of the art for issues 3 and 4.
Oh, right. So no inks by Pepoy, do you mean?
Well, so in issue 3, he's credited with pencils and inks. And in issue 4, he's credited with artist. And there are definitely pages in this run which look like they are pencils only.
Oh, right. So possibly, darkened pencils in places, perhaps.
Yeah. Which you either do because you've run out of time or as a stylistic choice.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So let's look at the covers. We've also got a few alternate covers. Maybe let's talk about some of the alternate covers first.
Sure. Why don't you talk about the alternate covers, and I'll talk about the main ones. How about that?
So on issue 1, we've got the 2005 G.I.Joe Collectors Club Convention exclusive cover, which is an image of Scarlet cowering behind a shadow. So this is on her solo mission. And this is by Caselli and Raj, I believe. There's a 2005 convention exclusive cover by Caselli, which is Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. There's a Buy Me Toys exclusive cover, Snake Eyes by Casey Haling, which is, I think, the least exciting of the lot.
Can I jump in on this one? This one is Snake Eyes with his Uzi and his sword from waist up in front of a brick wall, and the painting quality, it looks like there's a lot of airbrush, and the painting feels like a painting from the 80s or 90s. It feels like a Marvel magazine painted cover, and it feels, because Snake Eyes' costume seems a little invented. Sort of, so the piping on it is unusual, and the rendering on it is so different. It sort of looks like he's wearing very tight, sort of silken leather. It feels, the word isn't retro, but it feels sort of out of time. It doesn't feel like a comic from 2005.
Yeah, it's got that kind of sheen to it that someone like Greg Horn sort of adds a lot, but some of the anatomy feels a little bit wonky. You can see a lot of his veins through that leather or whatever it is that he's wearing. I'm not especially a fan. An exciting cover for me is the Graham Crackers Comics exclusive cover, which was released also with a foil cover, which is a Captain America #1 homage cover by Nelson Blake and Reese York. It's kind of a nice nostalgic throwback kind of cover. It's where Captain America was punching Hitler
Before we entered the war.
Exactly, very bold of its time, back in 1941, from Joe Simon and Jack Kirby.
And if I can add a detail here, the color on the G.I. Joe homage cover is meant to evoke old comics printing, because the colors are all flat and they're all desaturated, right? And if you wonder what I mean by desaturated, compare the red in the G.I. Joe logo, the stripe, with all of the other reds, which are they're basically a dark orange.
So just to finish that, whereas Captain America was punching Hitler before, we now have Snake Eyes punching Cobra Commander. So it's a lot of fun, that cover. The only other variant to call out is the second print for issue 3, which is just a black and white version of the main cover by Stefano Caselli and Sunder Raj.
This one is the point that I made about pencils and inks on characters and backgrounds as pencils only. You can really see it here.
Right. Yeah. So the foreground characters are inked, whereas the background has been left just in pencils. Interesting. Okay, so the main covers. I know you are chomping at the bit to talk about issue 1.
This is one of the greatest G.I. Joe covers. It hasn't achieved iconic status because it doesn't get a lot of sort of reproduction, as posters and shirts, the way that, some Mike Zeck covers do from the Marvel run or, issue 1. But Sunder Raj's painting of the backlit flag with the sun behind it and the highlights on the clouds and then the highlights on the Joes, and they're all looking down at us, and they are somewhat dark because they're all backlit except for their highlights. It's just it's so dramatic and quiet. The cover to Marvel G.I. Joe 1 is dramatic and loud. The cover to G.I. Joe, Marvel G.I. Joe number 2 is dramatic and quiet. And here is a dramatic and quiet cover. You have all of the attitude in how Caselli draws, furrowed brows and frowning men and women. The camera is low, the camera's at waist height, and it's looking up at them. And they just all look awesome and mean. And there's a big yellow number 1 in a circle on the top left, right? What a great cover. Cover to number 2 is in not a reverse of this, but it's 5 of those Joes, and now we're looking down at them. And this is not an homage to the Kevin Maguire Justice League number 1, also known as Justice League America or Justice League International from 1987, right? This is not an homage to that, but it is a similar, quote, camera angle. And here, all 5 of the Joes are holding weapons, and everyone's looking in a different direction. And they're all, bad attitude and mean. Storm Shadow, I'm a little confused by what he's holding because of how his hand and whatever it is sort of cropped by the barcode and the corner. I can't tell if I think he's holding a sword. It just sort of looks like a motorcycle handle. What's he holding, Mark?
It's probably a sword, isn't it? But with the blade sort of pointed diagonally down to the left out of screen.
But wouldn't the handle have a different wrapping? It looks like he's just holding like not a metal pipe, but it doesn't quite look like. Anyway, still a cool cover and remarkably desaturated. If you squint, there's sort of the off-white of the background and Roadblock's weapon and Flint's beret and Flint's shirt and jacket and Storm Shadow's entire costume and his weapon. And then you have just sort of a little bit of sort of all the other colors, sort of the warmth of the flesh tones and little bits of blue and green and red from costumes. The cover to issue 3 is, I think it's a better idea than it is in execution. It's really powerful and loud because the camera is on the ground in the sewer looking sort of both straight on at Firefly or blue and gray Storm Shadow, who is on his back being straddled by Snake Eyes, who's holding him down with his hand and pointing a sword right at his face. And then so we're sort of looking straight on at Firefly and also up at Snake Eyes. And so this ends up being something of a fisheye perspective. You're not seeing a lot of warping in it, but sort of that's the only way you'd be able to see both Firefly's head and also Snake Eyes. But the piping and the wrinkles, the clothing folds, and the musculature on Snake Eyes and also sort of both of them together ends up being kind of this like additional element in the cover that is overdone for me, right? Like the piping down Snake Eyes' mask, which then goes down his neck, which goes down his chest, which sort of matches the like bicep tricep piping. And then I appreciate the light source above and behind Snake Eyes, and there's an attempt to sort of separate their colors. There's some green in Snake Eyes' dark gray, which is different than the blue that's in Firefly's costume. But this cover becomes a little bit, it's sort of a little bit too much, and a little bit like I don't want to say mush, but this cover doesn't quite work for me. And then the cover to issue 4 is by rock poster artist R. Black. And this was a promotion that Devil's Due did that month for, was it 4-Bits Comics? Where Dragonlance Chronicles, Snake Eyes Declassified, G.I.Joe Americas Elite, and an issue of the adaptation of Exile, one of the Drizzt Do'Urden Forgotten Realms Dark Elf stories. These 4 comics, we've covered this briefly in a previous episode, but there's a 1-page ad in issue 4 where there's a photo of someone walking past a brick wall, and on the brick wall are these posters, which have been photoshopped on, but that's okay. Comics that rock! This October, all Devil's Due comics feature covers by nationally infamous rock poster artists Rich Black, Casey Burns, Jeff Gother, and David Witt. Don't miss these covers in October. Cool art by the guys whose posters adorn America's city walls. Cool covers at your comic shop. Devil's Due brings the rock.
Gnarly.
So this cover, you know who this looks like? This looks like the Luna Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Issue 4 is Scarlet kneeling, holding her crossbow, and holding a pair of dice in her hand, which are Snake Eyes, and she's blowing on the dice, but looking at you. So it's not cheesecake. It's not cheeky 50s, sexy, somewhat innocent pinup art, but it does slightly recall that. But if you have read Image comics by the Luna Brothers, they have this specific style with sort of an even line weight on everything they draw. There aren't thick lines and thin lines. And forgive me if one of them writes and one of them draws. I have not read their stuff, so I can't be more specific. And there's no background behind Scarlet here, and it's a neat cover. But I found this promotion, Covers That Rock, I found it disruptive when I was reading when these issues were coming out originally, and even though I wasn't reading Snake Eyes Declassified at the time, I was sort of aware of it because of this ad. And all the images are cool, or at least interesting attempts. And I totally dig Devil's Due doing something different and bringing in people who don't normally do comics. And maybe some of these people had a Chicago connection, and that's cool. But, you know, these 4 issues by Casey and Caselli in this new run really wanted 4 covers by Caselli.
And there's also an interesting note about this cover from the interview with Sam Wells that was done for the After Action Report book on the Devil's Due run. Great book. If you've not yet got it, go seek it out. Just Google After Action Report and you'll find it. And Sam Wells said that after the book was published and the comps were sent to Hasbro, we received word that the cover image was never to be reprinted anywhere ever again. Apparently, the comment from Hasbro was that the suggestiveness of the image was meant to convey something sexual, whereas we and the artist Rich Black only meant it to represent blowing on dice for luck, as anyone who's seen any film or TV show set in a casino could tell you.
Wow.
In this instance, I believe it was the case of the viewer's own imagination being a bit too provocative and projecting that upon our image. He also notes, interestingly, that having weapons on the covers was generally forbidden for a brief period during America's Elite. So they had to often omit weapons, avoid peril involving weapons, and avoid pointing weapons to the viewer. So a lot of the covers during the America's Elite run will either feature no weapons or weapons sort of being used in a fairly innocuous way.
The cover to issue 3, which I was thinking about this before I started talking about these 4 covers, where Snake Eyes is straddling Firefly in the sewer, and the sword is not technically touching Firefly's face, but it's, just in front of his nose, and Firefly's eyes are a little bit crossed as he's looking at this thing that's very close to him. And, comics has a infamous history of sharp things near the things that people see out of, and I'm struck by how intense the threat on this issue number 3 cover is. And I sort of wondered when I was talking about it a moment ago, oh, was there an earlier sketch where the sword is even closer? Like it's just touching. This is a question. This is not, I have no inside information. Was there an earlier sketch where the sword was, touching Firefly's forehead or anything like that?
So let's do plot breakdown. In the aftermath of the Chicago disaster, Joe Colton sets out how the new, smaller elite team will operate. Some Joes go on solo missions to investigate leads. Scarlet goes on a mission to investigate a Cobra agent, Cesspool. Hawk is convinced that Cobra Commander is behind the satellite disasters and convinces Duke to go on a mysterious mission to the Amazon. And in Chicago, Snake Eyes tracks down and confronts Firefly in the middle of a gang war. It is revealed that Baroness did not die back in issue 39, but is actually now a prisoner of G.I. Joe. Storm Shadow, General Colton and Duke interrogate the captured Baroness. The investigation of the crashing satellites leads the Joe team to the Arecibo, sorry about the pronunciation, observatory in Puerto Rico, where they discover a connection to Mars. Along with his son Alexander, Destro and Wraith are now operating out of the Cataclysm, a nuclear submarine, his new mobile seat of power. Destro is revealed to be working on behalf of Vance Wingfield. The G.I. Joe team has begun to figure out how the crashing satellites are being controlled using vibrational tractor beams to pull the satellites out of orbit, and they figure out how to fight back. Firewall joins back with the Joes on a mission with Colton, Stalker, Roadblock, Shipwreck, Flint, and Storm Shadow, who are using radar antennae in New Mexico to prevent the next satellite attack. Destro sends a swarm of prototype flying robotic Iron Grenadiers to attack the antennae. The Joes thwart the nefarious plans and prevent Vance Wingfield from crashing another satellite. This results in Wingfield's computer console exploding. Destro sets off a self-destruct for the remaining Iron Grenadier robots. To be continued.
So we were very excited about issue 0, and it's not a fair comparison comparing a single comic to the next 4 issues. But let me ask a different question. Do you remember, Mark? Because you read this when it came out in 2005. How did you feel as the series got in to the first arc?
Generally, I wasn't especially enamored with it. I felt like Casey maybe didn't get the characters in the same way that maybe some of the other writers had previously, and I think that sort of is borne out somewhat in my reread.
I like these first 2 issues, but I have some quibbles, and then the 3rd and the 4th issue, I'm starting to feel, it looks like Caselli. Well, there's some pages where he's definitely penciling only, but then, okay, if an artist is really fast or wants to prove themselves, likes how they ink themselves, doesn't want other people to ink them, or is sour because someone has inked them in a way they don't like, if they can pull it off, they should definitely ink themselves. But if this book is really hard to draw and it's always got scheduling problems, and so I'm looking ahead and I know that Caselli isn't going to stick around for very long, man, I sure wish Caselli hadn't inked issues 3 and 4 and someone had, so that, again, this is, I don't know how the timing actually works out, but maybe he would have been able to do another issue or two if he had been on schedule differently. Another shift happens between issues 3 and 4 where the colorist changes.
Yeah.
And so the colors for the first 2 issues here are
Sunderage with some help on, I think it's issue 2 from Carsten Bradley.
Thank you. And then issues 3 and 4, it's Kendrik Lim of Imaginary Friends Studios. And I don't like his coloring as much. It's pretty pasty. There's a lot of white. He's rendering with a lot of white, and it just sort of looks sort of pasty or chalky. It's less fun, and that coupled with the fact that I don't like the story as much in issues 3 and 4. This arc sort of falters for me. And my, sometimes we start at the beginning, sometimes we start with something nice. I'll start with something nice. Even if Caselli's drawing stuff that I'm not as interested in, even if his art isn't as fully rendered and lush as it was in issue 0 with all those gorgeous colors, I still like the art in issue 3 and 4. Some of the storytelling, there's some moments here and there that I have questions about. But sort of the main thing that happens, I'll just jump to the end. The main thing that happens, this is my final note on my notes for issue number 4. I wrote, this storyline doesn't satisfy with radar dishes and iron grenadiers. Smaller team, friction with Storm Shadow, friction with Joe Colton. I feel like twice an issue here, Joe Colton tells someone, that's an order, because someone doesn't trust Storm Shadow or someone doesn't trust Colton. I'm joking here. I think he actually only says it once an issue, but Colton says several times in this arc, that's an order. And it's a little overdone. So, and I don't remember how I felt when I read these issues, because I did come back for issue 0 of Americas Elite, and this reset at Devil's Due did pull me back in. I was very excited because I liked the writer, I liked the artist, I liked a reset that didn't rely on knowing what had happened in the previous series, and I stuck around as long as Caselli did. Okay, so the first issue, here's a little storytelling thing. So issue 1, page 3, the Joes are all around a table and they're talking, and there's really dramatic lighting because they're lit both from the windows and also from the table, which is cool. So they've got all this underlighting on them. And, Caselli's got his really dramatic sort of overacting. I mean that as a compliment, how people are tilted and twisting their spines and using their hands and looking at each other, and everyone's got attitude. And on page 3, Flint is holding something. Colton's just said, there's still leads worth following up on. And Flint says, does that mean we can win this time? I mean, the obvious solution is to simply eradicate every Cobra connection we can find. He's holding something, sort of a dark, baggy, black thing with a little stubby, looks like a shotgun round. Looks like the candy part of a push pop. Push a push pop. Da 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 da. Push a push pop. Flint pushes it for flavor. Flint pushes a push pop. Flint saves it for later. And I don't know what that object is. And in the top panel on this page, he's not holding anything. So I guess it's in his hand, but we can't see it, or it's in his pocket and he hasn't pulled it out yet. And this is a small thing. It's not a deal breaker. But I thought, what is that? And I assume it's an explosive with an arming device or a detonation button. And then we don't see it again in this scene. We don't see Flint on the following page. And then on the next page, he's kind of small in 2 panels, and I guess he put it back in his pocket. And it's like, where's the miscommunication? Either Casey is calling something out in his script and Caselli draws it, but the script and the art don't follow up on it. And I don't need someone in dialogue to say, Flint, what are you going to do with that explosive? And I think the idea is that Flint wants to eradicate, as to use the word he uses in this panel, to eradicate Cobra with something deadly like this, plastic explosive or whatever it is. So either it's in the script and Caselli draws it and they don't know what to do with it, or it's not in the script and Caselli adds it and an editor didn't say, oh, we should explain that, or, oh, Caselli, can you take that out or something? But then here's something sort of, interesting on page 5. Shipwreck has a line of dialogue which sort of resets the Josh Blaylock notion that G.I. Joe is now publicly known. Because remember in the previous run, Flint is a published author.
Yeah.
The previous run sort of does what the TV cartoon does, where people sort of know who G.I. Joe is. Like, remember in the second miniseries when Roadblock meets, what's her name? I forget. She got the cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And he says, and they're hiding in the back of a Cobra truck filled with food. And he says, I'm with G.I. Joe. I'm a gourmet chef and we're going to get out of here. And she says, G.I. Joe? And she knows what it is. It's like, how top secret is, so we know what the Green Berets are, even if we don't know anything about them. We know what Delta Force is, even if we don't know anything about them. Anyway, so Shipwreck has this line here. Welcome to the New Order. We save the world and no one ever knows. And Stalker says, as it should be. There's a freedom in being invisible. I wouldn't necessarily equate that with being expendable. And that line, so Shipwreck's line sort of changes Blaylock's status quo. And Stalker's response to me slightly recalls Larry Hama's line in Marvel G.I. Joe #1 that Hawk says, which is, our job is to do the impossible and be forgotten. And this line was changed before it was published as, our job is to do the impossible and to make it look easy, right? The editor changed that, and Hama didn't like that. And later, Hama, in a much later issue, I can't remember if it was Marvel or IDW, Hama got to do it the way he wanted.
And then that sort of is echoed, and it sort of follows up on a point that you made last time, which is that Joe Colton is talking about all of the people flying down to Ground Zero. Yes, yeah. He says
Chicago Ground Zero, not New York Ground Zero.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste time repeating protocol to those of you who felt the need to fly down to Ground Zero yesterday. This is the Chicago disaster. I admire your intentions, but our operation is strictly covert. We've already confiscated 12 cameras at the scene yesterday, just in case. Rescue crews are doing their job. Now it's time for us to do ours. And yet last time you said, well, hold on, G.I. Joe's job isn't really down, to go and fly down to disasters and, help people out the wreckage and, what they're doing, etc. And yeah, I think Colton is on the same page, and so he's sort of chewing them out over it a little bit.
Whoa, the Baroness is live.
She is.
Did you know? Did you remember?
I did remember, and
okay.
I knew that she was on front covers and things, which helps my memory.
Right. Okay. So when she dies, quote, finger quotes dies, at the end of the Brandon Jerwa run, even though I had seen America's Elite covers when just looking at, websites in the last year or 20, I really did think she was dead. And I think when we covered that issue, I said, oh man, Brandon Jerwa sure is taking a character out. And you said, well...
Probably. Yeah, he didn't fool me.
I think Casey's take on her is good. That she's not going to help them.
And we had an old section back in the day called Ninja Bullshits.
Ninja Bull, it's all the time. G.I.Joe and Ninja Bull.
And that's where ninjas can do sort of basically magic things. And Baroness calls him out on it. She refers to his ninja mind tricks as he's trying to extract information from her. And the result of that interrogation that they had, and then him going back up and sort of looking something on the computer, just seems completely tenuous to me. It didn't feel like they'd actually got any information out from her at all. Did I miss something, do you think?
But doesn't Storm Shadow say, I sort of got something? I didn't write this down, so... doesn't he...
He hints that he got something
in the second issue, and he says it in front of someone who wasn't in that top secret bunker.
Yeah, and they were like, downstairs?
Yeah, as they get back to the computer... yeah. Oh, downstairs? What the hell is he talking about, sir? Says Stalker in issue 2. Yeah, Storm Shadow says... Well, I can't find it, but... well, and then here's something... Okay, so you find that scene doesn't narratively accomplish much. When Scarlet goes to investigate... Cesspool and meets Cesspool's wife or partner.
Yeah.
And there are these 3 children who are actually evil
creepy robot children things.
Yeah, I don't know what that scene is for.
It was weird. I thought the scene. So they say sort of like, we can work together, and you can also go out and do your solo missions, try and gather intel. So she's got she's got some intel, and it's hinted that it's been planted by Destro. And so she's followed up on this intel, and it's taken her to Cesspool, where she's sort of been a little bit taken by surprise by his wife, and then the creepy blue ninja robot children. and it, to me, that's
and the
scene
ends.
And the scene ends, and then we don't see any more of it in these 4 issues.
Yeah. So Scarlet sees Cesspool, who's bedridden and sick, and then Cesspool's wife pops out with a gun, and they fight, and that's a cool 2 pages, 3 pages, and then Scarlet knocks her out, and the camera's low, and there are 3 silhouettes behind Scarlet, and one of them says, "You don't play nice. We don't like you. You hurt mommy." And Scarlet says, "Are these people really your parents' kids?" And then the 3 children tear their faces off and have glowing robot eyes, and they say, "You don't play nice. We don't like you. You hurt mommy." And then they've like fully torn off their heads and their hair, and they just look like sort of those later Cobra bats from is it like the Andrew Wildman issues, the Marvel run, like around 130, or were there some bats when Star Brigade goes to space? Phil Gosier was drawing it. These just don't look like any Cobra action figures that we've seen, and this is okay. If a former Cobra agent who is terminally ill is married and retired in the suburbs and has built robot children, that is fascinating. And you can do something with that. I think either the point is this person is crazy, but is trying to find some meaning in their life after sort of G.I. Joe versus Cobra, or the robots are one more action cue for, in this case, Scarlet to have a cool fight, or just to demonstrate even more how weird and damaged, in this case, Cesspool is, or how weird and crazy his wife is, who, if Cesspool couldn't have built these children because he's bedridden, then it sort of feels like the wife is going to show up again. They're going to get intel out of her. She's going to put on a costume and be a new Cobra villain or a new third-party villain. Sort of this page with the kids it's drawn nicely, but sort of narratively and in terms of momentum, like nothing about it works. It's weird and confusing, and it doesn't go anywhere. And I can't help but wonder, if this was Larry Hama, I would say, okay, Hama makes it up as he goes along. Maybe one day these characters are going to come back and we'll get an explanation that maybe Hama makes up later. And maybe we'd find that explanation satisfying. And maybe Hama has an idea about what he might do with it later, if he gets around to it later. And maybe he never gets around to it, and some of us are disappointed and some of us forget. Knowing that Casey is going to do, it's 18 issues, right? It's three arcs.
Yep.
I really hope that this really interesting concept comes back, but it doesn't come back in this first arc. So I'm not, game over, points off, but it's weird. Like the scene really wants one more page. So I can't help but wonder if Casey has this idea and an editor, or I don't think someone at Hasbro, but someone says, "Oh no, cut that shorter. Oh no, don't do more of that. You can get to it later."
Yeah, I think I'm on the sort of pretty much the same place as you are, which is that for me, this Scarlet sort of subplot is probably the most interesting part of the arc, and it's so short and it gets cut short so quickly, and then we don't see any more of it. This happens in issue 1, and then we don't see any more of it through to issue 4. So it's one of the sort of frustrations for me about this first arc. There is a little hint in issue 3. So I mentioned that Destro has planted some sort of seed which has led to Scarlet investigating Cesspool, and that's how she's ended up where she does. I'm just going to see. Yeah, he says when he finds out about G.I. Joe investigating retired operatives, protected individuals, he says,
"Interesting. There's an opportunity here. Let's feed some of our own intel into the data stream. Perhaps something will come out of it. We can use it to our advantage."
So that's, I think, what led Scarlet to this investigation. And then there's this little sort of side comment in issue 3, which is very easy to overlook, which is back on the sub. Destro says,
"Status."
An Iron Grenadier in front of a screen says, "Sir, transport sub has detached. Prisoner en route to Cell Bay Delta."
"Very well. Insurance is a vital component of any successful industry."
So very easy to skip by, but I think let's revisit that little seed when we get to future issues. Destro has a prisoner. Scarlet has gone missing. Let's see if that connects.
Okay, so one of my comments, one of my overall comments for this run, these 4 issues, is that I don't think the team of Casey and Caselli, or I don't think in the writing of Casey, he has excellent final pages or final panels. Either I want a really cool cliffhanger, or I want something that's just emotionally satisfying and moves us forward or puts a button on something. And the final page of issue 1, and then I'm going to jump to issue 2. That's a powerful image, right? We have this. I think Sunder Raj sort of did all the work here. There's this painting of this city. Is it Los Angeles? I forget.
It is Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, thank you. And there's this orange streak coming down through the clouds of another satellite crashing. And there's a sort of vignetted inset overlay of Stalker sort of seeing it, saying, "Not again." And I'm not that concerned about another satellite hitting an American city, because issue 0 did that. And I don't mean to be callous that kind of a disaster, if it happened a second time, that's no big deal. But the stakes of it happening a second time are equal to, but not greater than, the first. So when I got to this final page, I felt let down, because it's like, well, the Joes haven't figured it out in issue 0, and they're still looking, and I guess people are still in Chicago trying to, rescue people and put out fires and dig out rubble. And this isn't sort of the proper solution, but okay, if in issue 0, the stakes are one satellite takes out one city, then you sort of escalate it by twice as much or 10 times as much. It's like, no. If this was a movie, sort of the big disaster at the beginning is like one satellite, and then the end of Act 2 is all of the satellites falling, And so when I got to the end of issue 1, I thought, okay, I'll keep reading. I mean, this reading, I don't mean 2005. I'll keep reading because Mark and I are doing this podcast and I like these comics. But that wasn't actually enough on its own to keep me reading if I, wasn't a crazy G.I. Joe fan and doing a G.I. Joe podcast. And then it happens again at the end of issue 2, where my note is, not a good final panel. Where is this? So there's a subplot in issue 2 where Duke goes off on his own and uses some I guess because he's a CIA spook from between the Marvel run and the beginning of all of the Devil's Due run. So Duke's going to go investigate something, and he's in a plane, and he is ready to jump out in a parachute. And there's a quick flashback to how he got there because he shows a badge and uses his special pull, and
gets to use Cerebro to find the information.
Yes, Duke on the top panel of the final page of issue 2 of America's Elite does Professor Charles Xavier cosplay. And you don't see the sort of the spherical Cerebro from the live action X-Men movies. You don't see that round grid behind him, but you can pretend. And this final panel, this 2/3 page splash of Duke skydiving somewhere over, green. It's like, I don't know. Is it South America? Is it Africa? Is it Asia? Is it Florida? Right? And I couldn't help but feel like these 2 pages where Duke is on this mission, if they had been same art, but different word balloons and captions. If someone else had done a second pass on this would have been more interesting and satisfying. And at minimum, I'd like to know where he's going, because if it's someplace that has a G.I. Joe connection, like the Everglades, like, the Dreadnoks, or, like Sierra Gordo, or it doesn't look like Barovia, but I don't know, maybe Barovia has forests.
And then, and then we don't find out again until the final page of issue 4.
Right. And, it's 2005, and Marvel in the previous, starting just 4 years ago, Marvel has created a graphic novel reprint program. DC had, since the late 80s, turned miniseries and arcs into graphic novels, and in the 90s did it not comprehensively, but it got to be comprehensive. There were a couple famous stories like Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and then there's some Batman specials like Dark Knight Returns and Killing Joke, and then some important arcs, and then all 10 Sandman books, right? Like DC gets into this, and Marvel doesn't actually have a proper backlist program until Bill Jemas and Joe Quesada take over in 2000, 2001. And this is when writers are being encouraged implicitly or explicitly at various publishers or by particular editors to, quote, write for the trade. So don't try and pack in a bunch into one issue, or don't necessarily try and tell a beginning, middle, and end in any one issue. Write a 4 or 5 or 6 issue story, and maybe the first 2 issues are the beginning, and then the next 2 issues are the middle, and then, parts 5 and 6 or 6 are the end, because it's really about the graphic novel collection. And so maybe Joe Casey's thinking more like that. And, Hama's writing this G.I. Joe thing 20 or 22 pages at a time for 40 years, with a 10-year break in the middle. Okay, as a counterpoint to the prop at the beginning of issue 1, the explosive in Flint's hand that I don't understand and we don't see again. As a
I think
counter,
I'll just insert my thought here, which is I think it's a curled up beret and shotgun shell, but again, very on the same page. Not exactly clear what it's all about. But
that's great, because the beret is his costume, is the iconic part of his costume, and his version 1 costume, his Tiger Force reprint. He's got bandoliers with shotgun shells for his sawed-off shotgun. But Flint's Devil's Due America's Elite costume doesn't have shotgun shells on it. He's just got Stefano Caselli piping. Okay, that was good. Thank you. In issue 2, there is on page 12, around page 12, there's basically a flashback to around Marvel issue number 4. And that was exciting to me, because Casey is saying that, the Marvel continuity does connect and does matter. And I think we all liked Marvel issue 4, Operation Wingfield. And I just appreciate it. Okay, so
and I spy on this one. Wingfield is wearing a First Strike cap with the same logo from issue 4.
Yes, and whereas at the end of issue 0, I really wanted Wingfield to have his mustache and or his glasses and or his hat as a visual cue. I mean, when I'm 70 and an evil genius in a wheelchair, I will not look like I did in my 20s or 30s, and I won't wear the same clothes, and I'll have a different hairstyle. But this is comics. If we're going to see the Baroness, I need to see her glasses and her hair. There was the Baroness cues. So I do appreciate here that we're not just seeing a flashback to issue 4, but we're seeing Wingfield the way that he had been established.
Although they do tone down his moustache to make it less cartoony and twirly.
That's okay. That, to me, I sort of file that under, if they did a flashback, they're going to color it like modern comics in 2005. They're not going to color it like a Marvel book in 82. But in this black and white flashback, we see the hat, and then in all of the red orange tones in the present day in Wingfield's control center with the map, we see the hat.
Yeah.
And so as a counterpoint to Caselli losing the thread of whatever Flint was holding, here is a prop which is established and reestablished and gives added meaning and context. There's a little sort of satisfying emotional, yeah, it's that guy. This guy is that guy. Because I don't know how it reads in the collection, in the trade paperback, but these 2 pages face each other: the hat in the flashback and then the hat in the present day. It is pages 17 through 21 in issue 2, which appear to me as pencils only. And if you're wondering sort of where I see that, I think I see it everywhere, but I really see it in Flint's hair, where I'm seeing like pencil lines, not ink lines. But also there's a subtle roughness to sort of all of the lines. And this is okay. I'm not, I would prefer it be inked because it looks consistent. It's a little smoother. Page 18, someone mentions Blaine Parker as if I'm supposed to know who that is. And I thought, who's Blaine Parker? So now that I've Googled it, and I feel silly for not remembering because I am a crazy G.I.Joe fan. Mark, tell us, who's Blaine Parker?
Is this issue 2?
2.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So it's a page with a bunch of a radar on the top, and they're huddled over a computer.
So tell us all, including me, embarrassed. Who's Blaine Parker?
So I flicked to the page. I didn't notice that in the dialogue before. So it's I think it's Stalker talking. This could be a self-corrupting file. Here's something Blaine Parker taught me. Let's try and help it along. Confuse the Scuttle program. And I didn't pick up on that name, Blaine Parker, and it isn't something that immediately comes to mind. My guess would be, could it be Mainframe's real file name?
It is. So my question for you, Mark, is, because everything Joe Casey is doing here, we're judging, right? Would Blaylock have done this? Would Dan Jolly have done this? Would Jurwa have done this? How would Hama have handled it? You know, Casey's only got
Hammer wouldn't have done it. Hammer very rarely uses real names in the comics, so it's definitely not Hammer's. But I think Blaine Parker is too big a deep cut.
Okay.
For the most part, the Joes call each other by their code names, and Mainframe is not A-list enough for I think a typical Joe fan, for it to be reasonable for them to go, oh yeah, Blaine Parker, of course, that's Mainframe.
Right.
You know, maybe Conrad Hauser, Duke, maybe
Hector X Delgado, because that's said aloud in an episode of the show.
maybe
I will
maybe
never
Hawk's
forget
file
that
name, maybe even Roadblocks. But I think anything below that top tier, I think it's unfair.
Roadblock's name is also said aloud in an episode. Just his first name, Red Rocket's Glare, because his aunt and uncle own a fast food restaurant that Extensive Enterprises is taking over. That is such a good episode, everyone. So those are my those are my comments for issue 2. So I was going to hop to issue 3. Do you want to take the mic and say something?
For me, the key point for issue 3 is probably that for the most part of this issue, it's a kind of sidestep away from the A plots. Okay, sort of the A plot with the satellite and all the Joe shenanigans is kind of the bookend for the beginning and the end of the book. But then this middle section is this big fight, this big action sequence with Snake Eyes versus Firefly. So it's kind of somewhat stand-alone, and it was another part of a slight sense of frustration for me, is that it wasn't obvious kind of what this, other than it being a cool action sequence, what this particular story point was doing for the main part of the story. It seemed very sort of standalone, self-contained, and not progressing the rest of the story.
Okay. I'm going to get very specific here. So on page 8 in the sewer, Firefly is attacking this criminal, and he takes out his guard, or his sort of co-criminal, his underling. Snake Eyes shows up. So page 8, there's a half-page splash of Snake Eyes and Firefly and the criminal. And Snake Eyes and Firefly's costumes are too similar. And this is my critique. I really like Caselli's art. I like his costume design. I think the Joes and the Cobras look cool in the series. But there's this thing where everyone has the same piping on their costume. So Snake Eyes has it from his sort of his back neck over his head, down his face, under his jaw, down his neck, down his chest, right? He has a pipe sort of on his left, down his torso, even down to his legs, and he has this right piping. And if you look at Firefly has sort of a piece of armor over his chest. He has the same piping. And yeah, it's a little different on his face mask, but are Joes and Cobras going to the same, uniform store or costume designer? I mean, technically are. It's Stefano Caselli. That's cool. But in 82, the Joes can wear green cloth and the Cobras can wear blue cloth, and that's fine. That's not, confusing. And the Joes have those collars and like cuffs, and that's a little different from how the Cobras have. And this is something that jumped out at me in 2005 when I read this, because I would see like Storm Shadow, who's a Joe, and Snake Eyes, who's a Joe, and Firefly and Destro's son, Destro, and they all have, and Flint, they all have this like left vertical piping down their torso and legs, and this right vertical piping. And I don't know that everyone should have it on one team, and certainly not everyone should have it on both teams. It's a little weird because it doesn't make sense. if there was some story thing, if for Destro, it's like, aha, I sell weapons to both sides and make wars go on longer. My subsidiary, Mars Fashion, is supplying the Joes while that idiot Cobra Commander, it's like, and I'm making money on both sides. I mean, that would be too much, but at least that would explain it.
But let's talking about G.I. Joe fashion. Let's dig into it a bit.
Armani, Prada, Versace too. Joe's changed their outfits from black to blue. Duke and Hawk, look but don't gawk. Changing their kit, whoa, is that legit? Swapping camo jackets, headgear and boots. It's now neon colours and funky spacesuits. Sci-fi stalker and even roadblocks. While Bill, Flint and Mutt gave me a shock. So go take a walk if clothes aren't your passion. Cause it's comic book talk and lovely G.I. Joe fashion.
Firefly redesign. So piping aside, what do you think? I quite like this look. I think it works well because you've had kind of have the classic camo, grey camo Firefly version 1, which was sort of formed the basis for Firefly's previous look as he appeared in the Devil's Due continuity. Sort of just a bit of an updated version of that, and then you had the Firefly version 2, which was the kind of the Ninja Force neon green grey mask combination, and what we've got here in this look is sort of bringing those two things together. It's kind of that saboteur look combined with a sort of more subdued version of that green outfit. So I find it quite interesting, this sort of reinvention that they've got for Firefly here.
It's okay. If you look on page 13, panel 2, Firefly's taking a gun from a bad guy and also shoving his hand into the bad guy's face, and he's saying amateurs, and he's got a piece of armor on his shoulder bicep, and then he's got a piece of he's got a gauntlet like a bracer on his forearm, and it looks sort of like it's a piece on another piece. So it's like a little bit overdone. I also miss the actual camo. And one of the reasons why these two costumes, Snake Eyes and Firefly, look too similar, it's not just the piping, although that's a big part of it. It's that if you compare their version 1 figures, you have this guy in all black with this guy who's two different grays. And if you compare Snake Eyes version 2 with Firefly version 1, you have this guy who's all black or black and dark gray with this guy who's two different grays. And the fact that Snake Eyes doesn't have any pattern on him and Firefly does makes them immediately different. And as soon as you make them both sort of a middle and dark gray, and they each sort of have like gear on them, like gauntlets and bracers and shoulder, not quite pads, even though one of them has a mask and one of them has his eyes are visible, even though one of them is sort of grayish and bluish and one is sort of blackish and maybe a little something else-ish, they look too similar. And so this fight in issue 3, it's a cool fight, but I don't know, think of Batman fighting the Joker. If there's an arm or a boot, you know whose it is. Think of Wolverine fighting Sabretooth. There's some similarities in their costumes, but there are also some big differences. One's blonde, one's black-haired, particularly if you have the yellow and blue Wolverine fighting Sabretooth. But, this starts to be like Jamie Madrox fighting Jamie Madrox. It's like, well,
that's the multiple man for X-Men.
Yeah, that's an X Factor character. That's an X-Men character from Marvel.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I think Firefly version 1 is by far the best design and can't be beat. It's just a sort of a thought of a way of reconciling those two different sort of elements that have been established: the saboteur and the ninja.
I would take 20% of the detail and gear out of this Firefly redesign, and I would put camo back into it. And it could even be camoed. I guess there's a tiny bit on the cover on his face. It could even just be on the cloth that's under the armor. But I want a more sort of bold difference. And something like Snake Eyes having 3 grenades diagonally across his chest, that's that kind of thing. That's an immediate difference.
Yeah, interesting that camo does sort of carry across onto the grey bits of Firefly's outfit in most panels, but sometimes gets a little bit lost. And just because I guess it's so busy, sometimes you're thinking, is that shading? Is that camo? Hard to tell always.
I don't think I see it. Oh, okay. It's really subtle.
It's more subtle in certain panels than others. Snake Eyes also is his little tweak or redesign that sort of jumps out here is that his mask, his sort of visor thing, has got like an indentation in it, so that it's sort of almost making a very flat H. So it's got like a little dip in the top and the bottom.
Oh, you mean it's sort of the way that it goes from being a uniform visor to like sort of like sunglasses?
Yeah, almost like sunglasses. Yeah,
there's a pinch. There's a pinch where the nose is on the top and bottom.
Yeah.
And yet there are still 2 grooves in it to recall the actual visor of his version 2 costume. I think Snake Eyes looks great. I want something on his upper torso. I want 1 grenade on the left to recall version 1, or I want 3 grenades diagonally across to recall version 2, or I want 1 or 2 little knives across his chest to recall version 3. I like this Snake Eyes. It's missing 1 thing.
Yeah, those iconic elements have just been replaced by sort of piping and busy work.
And here's sort of a comparison. I think because of merchandise and movies and TV shows in the last 5 or 10 years, DC Comics and Warner Brothers have realized that Cyborg is an important character. He's on 3 different shows. He's in 3 different teams. He's had his own solo series. He's got a new one right now for Dawn of DC. And only recently did they give him a symbol. You know, right. Superman has a symbol on his chest. Batman has a symbol on his chest. I don't want the Joker to have a symbol. That would be silly. And, you know, Cyborg, when he was in Teen Titans for all those, decades, or Titans, he didn't have anything particular. And then I think it was when Warner Brothers announced their slate of Zack Snyder universe movies like 10 years ago. And there was going to be a Cyborg movie after Justice League and after Justice League Part 2. And I think maybe then that's when Cyborg got a sort of a glowing red C, or like a C with a red dot in the middle or something. And now that's on his chest in the comics. And Snake Eyes needs not a letter, not like a Snake Eyes face, but something.
And then you briefly touched on the Joe's sort of updated costumes as well, that they across most of the team now, they've kind of got this red, white and blue motif where there's sort of that, their right arm is got sort of red, their sort of chest has got sort of a white streak, and their left arm has got kind of a blue streak. So that they, for most of the characters, that's a sort of like a kind of unifying element of the red, white and blue.
Yeah, listeners, if you want a good sense of this, open issue 1 and look at pages 2 and 3, because you see Duke and Flint and Shipwreck and Roadblock all, and Flint all sort of, they've got their versions of this. I think it's okay. I think it never quite takes off, because it's not like there's a scene where they're all lined up saluting and I can sort of take it all in and compare it. And immediately there are ones with differences. Storm Shadow's not going to have this. Scarlet has her sort of yellow mustardish and sort of reddish chest and shoulder stuff going on. So I like the idea. And did you use this term in our issue 0 episode, or did we say it somewhere else where it's the costume? It's not like a military shirt that you like put on and button up. But it's not a superhero costume. It's a little bit both. It feels sort of like it's like Under Armour. Yeah. It's athletic.
Yeah. Like an athletic.
But it's
thick, stretchy, thick gear. Yeah.
It's not like a thin running shirt that wicks away sweat. It's a mean, Caselli draws it as kind of thick. I mean, it had to be thick to take all that piping. I don't like it on Destro. Destro, for me, does not work here. He needs a collar, some version of a collar, or a cape. Destro here looks...
At the same shop again.
Yeah, he's got the
Destro
same
fashion.
2 vertical pipes. Destro here looks... this sounds like a pun, and I don't mean it to. Destro here looks sort of naked. Like his costume is missing 1 or 2 things, because, you think of Destro in the 80s and Dr. Mindbender and Zartan and and the Baroness. These costumes are flamboyant. They're fun and funny. They're super villain costumes. It's like, I don't know, think of Marvel villains from the 60s. It's like Batroc the Leaper and Baron von Strucker, and Arnim Zola when he's got his head on a TV in his stomach. And here Destro just looks like a guy. And Destro and his son, I mean, yes, Alexander's wearing a red jumpsuit, but they just look the same. And I really need these 2 guys to be differentiated. And I really wish when Alexander shows up at the very beginning of the Devil's Due thing, Destro the Elder had his gold helmet so that I always know who's talking.
Yeah, why didn't they do that? But Destro Senior is shown at least in issue 1 with green eyes, and Alexander with blue eyes.
Oh yeah, the way that like Lex Luthor before Infinite Crisis, right? Weren't we supposed to know that the Lex Luthor who'd been in the Jeff Loeb, Ed McGuinness, Superman, Batman team up series was actually Lex Luthor from another universe or something? Because his eyes were the wrong color. I'm not enough of a DC fan to be able to answer that question, but I remember someone bringing that up. And then issue 4. Shall we jump to issue 4?
Yep. Yeah. You're going to do floating. We missed your floating hologram.
Oh, yeah. What do you think of that in issue 3?
It's a bit silly, isn't it? Particularly if it just appears from nowhere and there's like no technology.
Yeah. Okay, that's what it is. Yes. So in and of itself, it's not too silly for G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe has a lot of high tech and futuristic and almost sci-fi stuff. But Wingfield is in his wheelchair by the fire in Oregon, and there are 2 word balloons that are sort of a sound effect, and I think a computer voice or an operator. Premier 0, account holder, acknowledge. And he says, "Whoa, what the hell?" And he's sort of waking up. And then I think what's also throwing me off is this 3rd panel in this scene where Wingfield wakes up. The first panel where you actually see the Destro head. I don't think this is the right camera angle or size for the Destro hologram to have any effect, much less the intended effect. This is supposed to be shocking and cool and a upsetting invasion of privacy. Like, we would all be weirded out if a giant hologram head appeared. And if this were a movie, you'd have like some flickering light and like all the lamps would like go off and on for a second because the power is being drained, or like the fireplace would almost go out for a second, or there'd be a rumble, or like the TV would buzz, or like Wingfield would hear a couple electrical sounds, or there'd be some kind of computer or radar gear in Wingfield's room that's like receiving a signal, and there'd be words on the screen, or like the radar dish on his roof would like turn and receive a signal. And all we get here are those 2 word balloons that I just did. And then there's this, it is the size of half of my thumb on this page, this green head. And it's not like the cover of issue 1 where it's bigger than us and looking down at us. And it's not like the cover of issue 2 where it's looking up at us, but filled with attitude. We can't even see its face. We see its face 2 panels later. And so I think Caselli, in terms of capturing an emotion or the emotion of this cool, weird, exciting, upsetting reveal surprise, I think Caselli misses it.
And the next page, it has the head following him down a corridor, and it's behind him. This is even, less useful than a telephone call because he can't actually see the hologram.
This sort of reminds me of George Lucas filming some of the Jedi in episode 1 or 2 and Star Wars episode 1 or 2, and Yoda is sort of floating next to them as they walk down a hallway, and the scene lacks drama and tension because like Yoda wasn't there on set, and like they need the humans to walk at a normal speed, but Yoda can't walk at that speed. So let's give Yoda a vehicle, but let's give him sort of a weird distracting vehicle. And also like the background doesn't feel real because, there's too much green screen in those movies. This reminds me a little bit of that. It's like, oh, I've got this actor on a practical set talking to a visual effect that's not there.
So moving to issue 4. It's the return of everyone's favorite character. It's Firewall because the fans demanded it.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. That actually, I don't love this character, but I know that some people do, and I think this is a good link back to previous Devil's Due continuity.
Yeah, when I saw it, it made me think that Joe Casey was paying attention to the recent issues, that run of Devil's Due continuity, and sort of tapping into that.
The storytelling in issue 4, Caselli's actual drawing is good throughout the issue. His storytelling, his visually communicating what is in the script, who is who and where they are in relation to other people. And there's already a scene in issue 2 that I didn't mention that I found a little confusing. But in issue 4, on page 18, it's the page where Firewall is shot.
That window is shot through.
Where is she being shot from, and by whom? Because if you go to the previous page has her at that same computer, at that same window, and in neither case is the camera higher than her and looking past her so we can see down out the window. And yes, from general context, it's those Iron Grenadiers that are flying around. But I kind of need to see who's doing it, because this is a big moment in the issue where Firewall either gets shot or gets shot at. And it's this dramatic thing where a bunch of glass breaks, right? And then similarly on that same page, right, with Firewall getting shot, on the bottom 2 panels, the computer operator in Wingfield's Oregon home says, "Alert, multiple tractor beams broken, orbital targets maintaining position, overload imminent. And the panel of Wingfield, he looks like he's asleep. And he says, "No!" He's not reacting. And then in the next panel, it sort of looks like he has a heart attack. Or like he's shooting crystals and gems. Like he's shooting diamonds out of his body. And I think what Caselli is trying to do here is put the camera in the computer that's blowing out towards Wingfield and knocking Wingfield over and out of his chair. And that's not what I see at all. And if you want a comparison, look at Marvel Yearbook number 3, where Mindbender has Snake Eyes in the brainwave scanner, and Snake Eyes overloads the computer, and the giant monitor explodes in front of Mindbender. And we see Mindbender bracing himself. Ron Wagner draws this. It's wordless. Wow. Man, Wagner had to do it without word balloons filling in any gaps. The screen says overload, overload. And the screen is much bigger and it explodes, and like broken glass gets thrown towards Mindbender. And I can't remember if we see him get knocked over or not. I can't remember if we see him afterwards lying on the ground with lots of broken glass. But so it's sort of like these two things, and then this third thing that I'm going to mention, where this issue and this story stop working for me, where I feel like Casey needed more pages, or a 5th issue for this story, or Caselli is running out of time and is still drawing everything really well, but isn't sort of pulling the camera back, showing enough context, showing enough background, showing more than one character in a panel. I start to lose where people are. So this third thing that I want to point out that does not work for me in terms of storytelling is pages 13 and 14. If you're holding the comic, these two pages face each other. The top left panel is the big helicopter coming at us. And then the bottom panel is Flint in his parachute with an M16. And okay, so Flint is in this helicopter that's going down, and he says, I'm way too popular with these flying gearboxes. Gotta bail. And then he does something on the controller or joystick of the helicopter, and I can't tell quite what. And then there's an explosion, and this is good visual storytelling because Caselli places it's basically an over-the-shoulder shot. So we see Roadblock seeing the explosion. Roadblock says, Flint! Good God, not him too! And then there's a smoldering explosion in the air, and 3 Iron Grenadiers are sort of hovering around it. And I pointed out in our previous episode that sometimes Caselli's panel compositions, I don't mean his panel-to-panel continuity, I mean how he arranges elements in a panel, are not strong, and this is an example. And then Flint is screaming with his machine gun in a parachute, and he says, is that all you got? You think that's what it takes to take me out of the game? And then down on the ground, there's a hammer, and maybe you can tell us, Mark, if this is a re-release of the hammer with some added 2005 gear. And Shipwreck is on the side gun port, and he says, did you see that? I'm glad he's on our side. And I thought, no, this is how the scene gets directed in an action movie where everyone knows what everyone else is doing and everyone can hear and see what everyone else is doing because everyone's read the script. And in this actual scene, like, there's enough going on with all of these Iron Grenadiers flying around, and Shipwreck is busy shooting down his own Iron Grenadiers on this hammer that's bouncing up and down as it's like driving over these little hills, that he did not see the explosion and Flint get out just in time and the parachute open. He did not see Flint take out some Iron Grenadiers with his machine gun. Oh, wait, we don't see Flint take out Iron Grenadiers with his machine gun. We see Iron Grenadiers, we see Flint and a machine gun, but then there isn't a third panel where the shots firing from Flint's machine gun hit those Iron Grenadiers, right? We go to this like action movie star, angry, righteous vengeance, Flint yelling panel, which is very cool and sexy. It makes for a very exciting page. And then it sort of looks like the shots that are coming down at the hammer on the next page with Shipwreck's line of dialogue, is that coming from Flint's machine gun? Definitely not. But also, like, aren't these Iron Grenadiers really hard to take out? And Flint can do it while falling in a parachute with a machine gun? And I feel like Shipwreck's reaction here is sort of like, damn, that guy's tough. And then the audience agrees with him. But like, Flint isn't any better. He doesn't have like a magic, howitzer. He's just got a machine gun. This bit where Shipwreck sort of knows what just happens and sees it and is like, oh man, audience, isn't Flint awesome? Flint is so awesome. It's like Joe Casey is like trying too hard in this moment, in this is a strong word, like lazy action movie way. And I got pulled out of this scene here. And I know it's risky to say like, well, this isn't realistic, because a lot of G.I. Joe isn't realistic, but this isn't grounded. This isn't how sort of, a melee or a combat or a firefight would work. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden for a panel, Flint is a superhero. And Shipwreck definitely sees it. And I thought, no.
Right, indeed. And just following up on your previous point, the hammer was re-released in 2002 as The Brawler. Not the same as the previous brawler. It's an updated version of the hammer with this massive rocket launcher equipped on top, which really fires.
Was the brawler the Aqua vehicle from 93 or 94?
The brawler was this weird looking tank from 1991.
Oh, right. Okay.
Strange looking thing.
How does the big finale, how does the big fight with the Iron Grenadiers aiming at Joe headquarters with the radar dishes, how does it work for you?
Yeah, it sort of fizzles out a bit, doesn't it? So they do something computery. All dishes, push it, and then that means that Wingfield's computer overloads and explodes and kills him, and then Destro realizes that they've failed and self-destructs all of his robots. So it's all a bit too much and a bit too computery for it to be particularly satisfying for me. And yeah, Destro's idea that if he presses a self-destruct button and gets rid of all trace of the Iron Grenadiers, they say they all went up at once, only scraps left. Remote detonation, no doubt, disintegration to cover their tracks. And at the bottom of that panel with Flint and Storm Shadow is a bunch of parts, which could be easily gathered up and examined. But they've seen it with their own eyes. These massive Iron Grenadier robots, which have been captured on multiple cameras and things as well. So to just press the disintegration button and that's covered all traces, they'll never blink it back to me. Mate, Destro, you literally design these in your signature look. It's pretty obvious where these have come from. You are fooling nobody.
Yeah, that comment you made, it's all a bit, did you say rushed and computery?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the end of Devil's Due issue 4, reinstated with the nanites, and it reminds me of G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, the live action movie with the nanites. And there have been G.I. Joe stories, in animation and comics where they're dealing with satellite dishes. Like there's an energy surge in the 6th episode of the G.I. Joe cartoon. I think it's the 6th episode. So the first part of the Weather Dominator, maybe it's the 2nd episode, where the Joes fire an energy beam right back at the Weather Dominator and it causes it to break into parts. And certainly the Pyramid of Darkness, the 3rd set of 5 episodes of G.I. Joe, deal with, shooting beams of energy, not quite to a satellite dish, but to a thing kind of like a satellite dish all around the world. I'm trying to think of, I don't have a Larry Hama comparison, but I'm reminded a little bit of the story when Throwdown, and I don't remember, help me out, what issue number or span this is, Mark. The story in the IDW Hama Real American Hero run where Throwdown is is this during the death of Snake Eyes? He goes up into the atmosphere in some kind of ship or robot.
Yeah.
And
so
the
this
heat
would be
is so...
like, round about, is it 212, some ish?
212 or 213. And this is how Throwdown gets scarred and I think loses his voice. So he's sort of becoming the new Snake Eyes when Snake Eyes dies.
Yeah.
And so you have this is not a comparison here, but you have, sort of dealing with something going across a distance. Again, it's not a fair comparison, but I feel like Casey doesn't have sort of a dramatic enough visual and explanation and sort of triumphing of stopping the challenge that, considering how big the stakes are in issue 0, a satellite crashes into American City. And then it happens again at the end of issue 1, but we don't really talk about that. And then at the end of issue 4, it's not Cobra Bats, but it's basically Cobra Bats. Destro just throws some Cobra Bats at Joe Base, and that feels out of proportion with issue 0 and 1, both as a visual, as stakes, and as a narrative, and then combined with it's like I don't like the color as much in these second 2 issues, and there are some storytelling bits that I find less clear or a little distracting. And I sort of feel like these, issues 3 and 4, issues 1 and 2 are the first half of a different story. Like somewhere out there, in like the Joe Casey multiverse, there's a different conclusion to, was it America's Newest War?
Yep.
And similarly, somewhere out there in the Joe Casey multiverse, there is a different issue 1 and 2 that is the first half, or 0 and 1 and 2. That's the first half of how we see 3 and 4 wrapped up, which has to do with like criminals in, is it Chicago, in the sewer, and Iron Grenadiers. And then similarly, one more sort of thing, as the Joes are having these individual moments in issue 4, taking out these Iron Grenadiers, Flint gets some cool angry moments, and Stalker gets to say something because he's in that weird dune buggy vehicle. Is that a new version of the Ostriker? And then Storm Shadow shows up, and there are a couple panels of Storm Shadow. There's 2 or 3 panels of Storm Shadow using his swords, and he's sort of doing it in an unspecific way, how he's like chopping up the Iron Grenadiers. And I can't help feel that if this was a different G.I. Joe writer, there'd be more specificity to sort of what he's doing and how he's doing it, as opposed to just like a panel of him slashing and some like robot parts around him.
That sort of all-striker type buggy thing is called the Sand Razor, by the way. Again, a relatively modern vehicle at the time from 2002.
You know what I forgot to say early on? I forgot to say early on that in the letters page of issue 1, it says, we've been planning this relaunch for 6 months.
Huh. Interesting.
Which is a line that probably belongs in our issue 0 America's Elite episode, where we're doing the timeline of why Devil's Due had to start G.I. Joe over, and then the artistic choice to get a new writer, a different artist, maybe someone who didn't have a connection to G.I. Joe, the fact that issue 2 came out 2 weeks later, and that, we've always felt that the end of Jurawa's run is rushed. And so it's interesting. I don't think that necessarily means that Joe Casey had been writing issue 0 6 months earlier, or Caselli had been drawing it 6 months earlier. I think Devil's Due's thinking of it and, starts to talk to Hasbro about it.
Yeah, and I think that timeline sort of is aligned to what we sort of knew before, that there was that sort of that interview with Josh Braylock sort of, announcing the new series, and that was some way in advance of Brandon Joa concluding his run. So, I think at the time we sort of talked about that's kind of as the background to kind of the last furlong of the Brandon Joa run, that all of this was happening in the background, that we knew it was coming to a conclusion, and that would be influencing the way that things were being tied up. In the first issue 1 letters page as well, there was something that I noticed, which was that in reply to one of the letters, they said, for you new readers, we hope that you found this title to be compelling and accessible. So it's sort of really drumming home that this is kind of a relaunch, and they're really hoping to get new and lapsed readers back on board.
All right, so issue 4, Mark, since we're wrapping up the story and the comments on the issues themselves, we end with Destro doing the self-destruct thing and saying, I have felt so dead inside, and yet I still find life within. The blood boils in the heat of battle. The heart beats strong. Was that not our most potent drug, dearest Anastasia? He's just talking to himself. He doesn't know that she's alive. And then his son shows up. And then there's this last page at the end of issue 4 where Duke, it's okay. That's a cheap shot. With some very prominent insects, just very, very prominent. I think it's sort of like the rotor blades from issue 0. I think I needed Caselli to draw these a little less in focus. Anyway, we get to see Duke using one of the many languages that he knows, right? Konrad Hauser, if you've read his file card. So he's going somewhere and doing something. In the third panel, I thought this bit of dialogue, I know I've been a little mysterious so far. The mission, our final destination. I thought that was a little on the nose. I don't think that's quite the way you'd say it, but okay. But I wanted to ask you, Mark, how you feel about where we're leaving Destro and or the Baroness, and how you feel about this Duke subplot and where issue 4 wraps up.
So it's nice that sort of Destro, the Baroness is sort of playing on Destro's mind because he's still kind of unaware of what's happening. So that's fine, if a little over dramatic, and I do like it when the sort of the story is seeded, so that there isn't an abrupt end. You know, complete. This is your first 4 issues collected for trade. I do like it that this is a monthly book, and we're gonna have a connective tissue between this issue and issue 5, and so having a clear sort of continuation story with that Duke subplot where he's on this boat, seemingly in the Amazon or somewhere, that's fine. It's but as you say, maybe if they didn't have it, they could have had a little bit more space to tie up things slightly more neatly.
Here's what I want for these final 2 pages. I want the final page to say epilogue at the top of it. And I want, I need a release. On the previous page, they're still finishing the battle. A weird floating Iron Grenadier head, I don't know where its body is, explodes just like 20 feet over a roadblock, and then we see this like copy and paste of satellite dishes with little explosions all over it. You're allowed to copy and paste if you're repeating stuff. It's not a cheat. And then that line of dialogue you already did with Flint and Storm Shadow, and then Stalker says something with this really nice bit of acting where he's taken his beret off, and then this panel, the final panel of the main story, right, separate from the Duke subplot. This is how packed it is. Colton is sort of commanding or ordering at all the Joes, and he says, we've got a lock on a secure location. Pack it up and get ready to move again. And behind him is, I think, Oregon on a map of the continental U.S., and it's highlighted because they're going to go get Wingfield. And I don't know if we're ever going to, I don't know that we're going to see that in issue 5. I think that's sort of all unseen, like mop up or cleanup. I don't remember issue 5. So maybe they go and get Wingfield and they find him with all these diamonds around him. And then Colton says, he continues, and somebody try and get in touch with Duke, Scarlet, and Snake Eyes. Where the hell have they been this whole time? And I think even though Casey is splitting up the team, because Snake Eyes is on a solo mission, Scarlet's on a solo mission, Duke's on a solo mission, and I feel like Snake Eyes and Scarlet's solo missions are kind of allowed and Duke's isn't. But I think what I needed here is something in this scene where, even though they need to immediately pack it up and get ready to move again, I think I need Shipwreck, Storm Shadow, Flint, Roadblock, Stalker. I think I need them to all come together for like one panel, one half-page panel where they don't actually like raise their fists and do Yo-Jo like it's the poster for 1984, or they like all come back into the main building where Firewall was shot at and Colton is, and all those green shirts, those tech green shirts are at the computer. I sort of need them to all like exhale together, because this story or this issue has been sort of a sprint, and it's really exciting. And this is where I feel like, oh, this needed one more page or a couple more pages or one more issue. And even if realistically they actually have no time to waste, it's like, okay, the C-130 is landing in 5 minutes. Like, all of you, like, reload your weapons and like, head over to the western.
We're all going to Oregon.
Yeah, like head over to the western orange traffic cone or like the western fence of the base. That's where the plane's going to land, and immediately take back off. I need them to sort of art-wise, I need them to all be together and like someone pat someone on the back, or I need a little bit of a visual sense of closure on this attack, which sort of ends the threat of the previous 5 issues.
A good point. And Colton's dialogue sort of highlights something for me, which is one of my frustrations as well, which is that Scarlet, Duke, and Snake Eyes have been on these solo missions and sort of been off the radar from all of the rest of them. In particular, Scarlet, where it was issue 1, she was in this conflict and seemingly has disappeared or something, and they've not noticed it. Just what I like about G.I. Joe is sort of, that they're meant to be the best of the best and they're meant to be elite, and for them to split off in solo just seems out of character anyway. You normally would have, unless you're someone sort of ultra capable like Snake Eyes maybe, or Storm Shadow, who's maybe a bit more of a loner, you'd expect there to be more of teams of people, at least 2s, rather than just on completely solo and without any sort of backup or support. And for Scarlet to go off on her own, get captured, just seems like without anyone being aware or noticing, just seems like amateur hour. And they're a smaller team, less of them, but not to have any sort of backup, not to have anyone monitoring or comms, or someone in a van outside with binoculars or a night scope checking out what's going on. It feels like like I say, amateur hour.
It feels like an X-Men story where the X-Men are dealing with a problem at the mansion, and Wolverine is off on his own in Florida, and there aren't a lot of solo G.I. Joe stories. Like you say, it's sort of always 6 or 4 people jumping out of a plane or in the woods on a hill overlooking something. Yeah,
it'd be like, it's a fire team, got someone kicking the front door, another person around the back, and you've got someone at the front, and you've got another person covering your 6.
And Wild Bill is up in a plane, up right now, or like coming in an hour.
Eyes in the sky, yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder, maybe I'm not being harsh enough, maybe I'm being really open-minded for how this series goes, but I wonder if these points are evidence that Joe Casey's not the right person to write G.I. Joe. That as excited as I was about Wildcats and his Uncanny X-Men run before this, and sort of happy to have anyone who was a good writer take on G.I. Joe after some of the previous comics, that maybe it sort of only half works. And it's funny because one of my refrains on this show is, this is a difficult book to draw, and this is a difficult book to write.
Yeah, it's true.
And just as not everyone should draw a team book, some people really should draw solo books. Maybe not everyone should write a team book. And Casey wrote good team books, so it's not like he's out of the running. But G.I. Joe is such a particular kind of team book.
Okay, next up, if we're done on the main sort of discussion, I've got one little I spy, which is that the Arequibo Observatory in Puerto Rico is a real life place, and it is an anagram of Cobra, i.e. it's got Cobra, and then there's a I and an E left over at the end. I wonder if that was intentional, like Arbco.
Quote of the week, 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 quote of the week.
I don't have a favourite line of dialogue, but I've got a least favourite line of dialogue.
Tim doesn't like it. Someone is talking. Dialogue's clunky. The words are bad.
Which was Flint. There'll never be enough of you to satisfy my hate. A little bit on the nose. Are you telling me Flint's troubled?
Yeah. I think I'd be okay if he said that quietly to a therapist, but isn't he also yelling it in a fight?
Yeah.
And that feels overdone, that, he's going to start to get sloppy, and, that line is sort of a little bit too much for the benefit of the audience. I don't have a favorite line or a least favorite line, so what's next?
Yo Joich, I think.
Yo, cola, not grape soda.
It's Yo Joich time.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
So for me, the positives are it's a big story. It zips along. A lot happens. It's it's very compelling. The art is great. I think Caselli does an amazing job. Slightly variable coloring, perhaps, but still relatively strong across the patch, and not too jarring, at least to me, the change of colorist. And I think in terms of art, it's very, very strong indeed. I think there's quite a lot of missteps in terms of storytelling. There's that growing sense that maybe Casey doesn't quite get the characters as well as other writers have. I didn't like the way that Scarlet disappeared in issue 1. I wasn't sure about the Snake Eyes solo dead end in the midst of all the rest of the story. I thought the ending with the computer things happening was a little bit underwhelming against such a sort of bold opener. The Storm Shadow distrust from the likes of Shipwreck just got a little bit tiresome. I thought Flint's troubled outlook was a little bit too on the nose. And his grumbles about the team wasting their time on detective work and just going out and getting the bad guys just seemed a bit weird. You do have to do the legwork to figure out what has happened, who has done it, where you have to go. There's no such thing as just a nebulous bad guy that you can punch on the nose every time. The Baroness being alive was a nice sort of reveal, but the interrogation seemed a little bit odd, and then sort of Storm Shadow being a little bit more of a Storm Shadow and across the team all being somewhat of intel hackers, etc. to find all of those links again. It's convenient for storytelling purposes, but possibly not obvious for the characters and their own strengths. So I sort of talked a lot about the things that I didn't like, but overall I still enjoyed it. I thought the art was strong. I thought the story was overall interesting despite all of those sort of grumbles. So I'd still probably give it something like a 7.
I'm going back and forth between a 5 and a 6. A 5 feels punitive, considering how much it falters. A 6 feels generous, and considering what a step down it is from the excitement of issue 0 and the color and the art, I think a 5. I'm not, I mean, I like this opening arc more than I do the first Devil's Due arc, reinstated issues 1 through 4 from 2001. But, this doesn't, America's Newest War doesn't quite add up. And it's a 5, and I'm happy to keep reading and see where it goes. Although I know that Caselli leaves and then Casey leaves, and then it becomes sort of a different book. So 5.
Yeah, I'm definitely very curious to see where this goes, and if what's threads Casey sort of pulls on over the course of the next few issues, and whether some of my misgivings slightly turned around. We shall see. So I think we are done with Americas Elite 1 to 4. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we will continue our look at this America's Elite era with maybe 4 issues or so from the next few. I'll read ahead and try and figure out where the best cutoff point is. And then, of course, we'll be covering all sorts of other goodness as we go along on other shows. So, Tim, where can people find you when you're not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
Video essays on film and TV at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. You can find us on the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website with links to all of those places. You can join the Facebook group. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. You can contact us and leave us a voicemail. And you can like and subscribe everything over at YouTube. We are also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, and Shane, who are getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. And that's us done. But remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.